You're listening to the Reality of It All podcast, candid conversations about today's hot topics. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are getting realistically happy. And that's, kind of a big difference from just happy. So with me today is Pamela Gail Johnson. She is going to help us with practical happiness and her 4 principles to improve your life. So Pamela, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
I am excited to have you on. There's nothing wrong with getting happy. So in this time, especially with this pandemic and stuff, Lord knows we need it.
Well, I think we were actually, America was happiness challenged prior to the pandemic. Our happiness numbers have been decreasing to the lowest they'd been in 50 years. And then fast forward about 6 months when the pandemic hit after that study, obviously, I think that trend has continued downward. I think people have been trying to the pandemic forced people to do what I call, work-wise, they call it the Great Resignation, but I think we're in a great reevaluation. So people are reevaluating everything from careers to relationships and friendships and, what makes them happy.
Absolutely. And and there is a difference between just, being happy and being realistically happy because, I think we can put on a facade and, try to convince ourselves that we're happy, but in reality, we're really not.
Well, happiness is both easy and complicated at the same time. It's elusive, and yet when we're feeling happy, we know it, because I think the fundamental definition of happiness is when we feel good. So, and naturally feel good in a moment. So I always want to preface that with naturally feel good in that moment. And so sometimes happiness is a moment, and that's okay, because if you're feeling with one of our principles is about happiness zappers, all those things that kind of zap away our happiness little by little. Sorry, I hit that. Happiness is we have happiness zappers. Even the happiest of happy people have happiness zappers. Although statistically, people who consider themselves mostly happy versus people who would consider themselves mostly unhappy have about the same number of experiences that zap their happiness away. So it's a little bit about how you approach those that really does impact your happiness. And that's part of being realistically happy, expecting that those things happen. But I think but people are, reevaluating a lot about what, again, makes them happy. Now, sometimes, let's say were cooped up in the house in the snowstorms with your family, probably for 2 or 3 days of recent that happened in the Northeast this weekend. Your happiness, even if you love your family, your happiness was probably when you got to actually open the door and you could actually walk out without needing a snow shovel in front of you to get out and just to get that fresh air, because it was just this moment that you probably felt good. It was a feel good moment. And it doesn't mean that the chaos that was going on inside the house after a few days of being locked up, didn't have some happy moments. But so sometimes, again, our happiness is really very dependent upon the moment we're in. And sometimes it's about just feeling a little bit better than we felt the moment before. And then sometimes it can be like, yay, I finished running the marathon. I've been training. I worked really hard. It was a long-term goal coming. And so I'm super excited. Or maybe if our football team wins the Super Bowl, we're like, doing a cartwheel. I mean, so sometimes it can be those kinds of moments, but a lot of times it's like I said, walking outside and probably getting a breath of fresh air if you've been cooped up for a couple of days, weather-wise, or if you got sick and you had to quarantine or whatever. Sometimes it's just that little bit of things that makes you feel a little bit better.
What about those people who they just exude happiness? I mean, it just radiates out of their pores. It seems like they never have a bad day. Nothing ever goes wrong for them. I mean, is that realistically happy, or is, Now,
part of our happiness is genetic. So some people are going to have a higher genetic set point. So like they just naturally see the glass half full, just like some people have a natural ear for music and can listen to one song and then sit down on their guitar or piano and figure out what the notes are without reading a note. I mean, we all have some different talents. And so some people are just genetically predisposed to being a little bit happier. I think those people, again, it's not that they have fewer moments that zap their happiness, but what they do is they manage them in a very proactive way. So some people are a little bit more victimized by the things that zap their happiness. And that's sort of where they get attention. And that's where they get, in their own way, a feel good, even though it's really a vibe. It really takes their vibes down, versus that other person who's probably just a little bit more proactive, if you will, about how they are going to manage, let's say, a happiness zapper. So let's say, happiness zappers, let's just go over those. So we have 5 kinds. One is unhappiness. And that's what we call that. Those are losses. Usually they have to do with some kind of lifestyle change that you probably didn't ask for, that you didn't want. Death, of course, is the ultimate loss. So a death of a loved one, or death of a pet. These are not things that you just wake up and go, oh, I'm going to be happy today. You're going to be doing a big ebb and flow through that. But it can also be the loss of a relationship. Like if somebody's gotten a divorce, or if somebody has broken up, with a significant other, or it could be a friendship that you're estranged from. I mean, if you've been friends with somebody a really long time, most people are going to have had some kind of window, whether it's a day or two or weeks or months or years, that maybe they were estranged. It can happen with your family members. It can happen with so many different people. Maybe you have a job change that you didn't ask for. You were like, okay, I don't want this job. If they're saying, hey, this is what we're doing now, or this is what our company is changing into, and you didn't like that. You were like, hey, that's not what I wanted. Or we all have had to go to the doctor sometimes, and the doctor's like, you need to quit eating your favorite whatever, because it's not doing well for you. So you get to have that on your birthday now. That's it. And you're like, yeah, I didn't ask for that. So we all have things that happen that we don't ask for, that we have to sort of grieve. And that's unhappiness. And it's going to be an ebb and flow journey. It doesn't mean that you have no happiness while you're going through that process. It just means you may have less, or your happiness may be a lower vibration kind of happiness. It might just be you're relieved at the end of a day when you get to sit down and it's quiet for 10 minutes. It's a little bit different than fun, when you're just like, yay, I'm having fun and I'm laughing with my girlfriends or my posse, whatever that is. Then we have stress. Do you ever feel stressed?
Oh, never.
Never? No. So probably like every day,
all
right?
the time.
Yeah. And so we're all going to have to manage stress. Now, some stress is good. And it's that kind that makes us like try to be better at doing something or improving our skills. But even too much of that stress is called eustress can wear you out. And then some is just bad. And usually a lot of that stress just has to do with managing our to-do list, or just getting everything done, or we kind of get stuck in fear, which is our next happiness zapper. It's fear. Obviously, somebody has a real fear going on, like let's say your house is on fire, do the appropriate thing, call the fire department and get out of your house. But most of our fears are kind of right up here between our 2 temples. They're in our head. So they stop us from doing things that would possibly make us happy. I think of fears, oftentimes the ones in our head, is they're the bridge to regret. It stops us from applying for a new job that we might want, or considering moving to a part of the country that we've always wanted to live in. Or let's say we had on our bucket list. We want to go skydiving, but we have a fear of heights. It ponders us. It stops us from even maybe going to take the class to see if we want to try to get through that. Now, obviously, if that's too scary, you might not want to do that. But if you go to the class, you might start feeling safer because you're going to be around people who are super excited to do it. So those fears, we just want to make sure we're managing those so they don't manage us and stop us from doing things. Annoyances. Well, I want to do annoyances last. That's the kind of the one we have the most control over. Chaos. You ever wake up late and so your day gets started late?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
that's an easy one. Or you walk in your house and there was a pipe that burst, so you got a flood going on, or your kids walk in and say to you like, hey, it's 10 p.m. at night. And you're like thinking you were supposed to be in bed an hour ago, but they tell you they have a school project or they were supposed to take 20 cookies tomorrow. And you're like, yeah, thanks for letting me know that. So that's chaos. Chaos is temporary. You know, like usually once you get through it, you may have some aftermath effects. So like, let's say you have a flood. Once you get the initial water out, you're going to be dealing with your insurance company and replacing stuff and fixing stuff. But that's a different level. That moves over to stress. It's not really chaos anymore. The final one's annoyances. And I think that one's the one we lose the most happiness to. That's truly in the choice category. Annoyances are things that can impact our mood drastically, yet will probably have zero impact on our overall life. So they fall in the category that I always say to people. So somebody's rude to you, or you were stuck in traffic because you left late, or different things. I always say to people, will you remember it a year from now? And if the answer is no, it's one of those things, try to stick it in your God box, let it go, blow bubbles, do whatever you need to do to, you know, go deck your damn it doll. Whatever it is that helps you let that one gone. I know I have a damn it doll, and sometimes I just will get it out and hit it. And then this year actually for Happiness Week, we told people to get what we call zap your Happiness Zapper wands. Uh-huh. So here's one of them. I have about 7, but here's one of mine. So, you know, sometimes I'm just like, go away with my zapper wand, and it just kind of well, what it does is it elevates your
mood.
It elevates your mood. And when you're in a better mood, isn't it much easier to manage any of the happiness zappers?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Versus when they just pile on. So we just tried to make Count for Happiness Week, which was in January, just like I said, a little silly and like I said, this is my favorite one, but I do have my Harry Potter one. I have a stick. So your wands can just be, you know, they can be just whatever speaks to you in the moment. And then we actually, in the book, Practical Happiness, my new book, we actually have what we call a zap map, which is a zapper management action plan to, again, help you manage your happiness zappers. Because if you don't manage those, they manage you, and they really do continue sucking away at your happiness. And I think that person that you're talking about that seems to never have problems, they just, whether they're officially calling it a zap map, they just approach the things that seep away at their happiness. They just approach them a little bit different than some other people do. And most of us do it somewhere in the middle. We're not totally victims, but we're also, you know, not necessarily totally being proactive about managing those zap maps.
Yeah, I have my moments. Mine are up and down. You mentioned annoyances, and I'm thinking, okay, the kid's bugging me constantly. My phone is blowing up while we're trying to record this podcast. The dogs are whining at the door, you know, talking about annoyances. And my cat was crawling all over me. I had to spray him with the spray bottle. Again, leave me alone. I mean, you know, yeah, all of those little distractions and annoyances. And I'm like, come on, you guys, I'm working. I just want to focus on talking with Pamela today, you know?
But see, I saw your cat is loving on you, and you saw your cat is crawling on you.
Well, actually, he was about to start sucking on my ear. He likes to suck on my ears. So he was loving on me, but it would have been an annoyance when he started sucking on the ear because he's not quiet.
I said, hard to hear too, probably.
It does. Yeah. When he starts purring and everything. But, but where I was going with that is, I've got all these little annoyances, but I'm still sitting here with a smile on my face. I'm still enjoying our conversation, and I'm not, angry or pissed off, or, it's not really bringing down my level of happiness for today. It's just minor inconveniences.
Well, right. And you won't remember them. You probably won't remember them next week.
I'll probably won't remember them later today.
I say, unless you're listening to the podcast and then you're like, oh yeah, all those things were going on. Like I said, you won't remember those events. And that's where you're, like I said, you should probably get a little zapper wand and you'll probably have fun playing with that. Or
I have a Harry Potter one somewhere. I'll have to go find it.
Yeah. And you can play with that, because it does sort of change how you look at those things. And then actually what you're going to discover is when you really get to this place that your annoyances don't really, you just, it's not that you don't own them. You don't want to ever get to this place of something, is lowering your vibe, is decreasing your energy. You always want to acknowledge it so you know what it is, and you sort of honored that feeling, but you don't have to hang on to it either. It doesn't have to be defining. And the sooner you, like you said, you can kind of let that go, like I said, the happier you are. The other three in the middle usually require a little bit of being proactive and an action oriented type. And then again, unhappiness is one of those things that, if you lose somebody, or quite frankly, my dog passed away almost 3 years ago now. And, I still feel sad when I see his picture or think about it. Like sometimes you have these little grief moments, and you learn to live with it. That's the management piece. Yep. But it may never go completely away. Or if you had a job you just loved, and it got changed on you and you didn't want to change it. You may always think about that job and smile and have what we call nostalgic happiness when you think about the happy memories, but you can also still always have a little pinch of, yeah, I wish I was still there, or I wish I still had that boss, or that team was still in place, or whatever that it was that you loved about it. So, and that's normal, and that's okay. You just don't want to get where you're just carrying that with you 24/7, and that's your defining persona, because that will, continue to always kind of zap your happiness. But again, it's still a process. It's not something, like I said, that, and you may have to have that moment years later, even when you sit down and you go cry or you journal, and that's okay, because you have to honor those feelings. You just don't want to do it at completely the expense of the feelings and the things that make you feel good.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nobody can be happy all the time. That would be exhausting.
Not naturally happy all the time.
Not naturally happy. Yes, that would be exhausting. But, the majority of the time, when you manage all those little issues, the nuances, or not the nuances, the annoyances, the chaos,
stress,
the ones that you can manage easier, loss and stuff that obviously you can't necessarily manage that.
Well, you can't manage. You can manage it, but you don't manage it as in, I'm just going to decide to be happy today, or like say stress. Like if you're really stressed at work, we all have our go-to stress, whatever. So for some people, it's going and taking a run. For somebody else, like for me, if I'm super stressed, I really just need to get my yoga mat out. I need to sit down, turn on one of my meditation, loops, music, whatever. And I need to just really get into my breath so that I'm super connected, because I don't like to sweat. So that's why I don't want to run. I don't get the runner's high, or, my dislike negates the chemical feel goods. Somebody else, it's just turning on Netflix or whatever their favorite binge, Amazon, wherever they binge, and they're just sitting there and they're like, hey, I got to go zone out. Somebody else, it's reading a book. Yep. And just getting absorbed in the book. Some people, it's just taking a casual walk. Whatever our go-to stress piece is, but there's an action focus to it. And it also may be different depending on what's stressing us. Like let's say your kids are being little, They're jumping all over the furniture. They're being kids. They're doing
They're being kids. Yeah.
Your moment may be when you feel relieved because you got them to bed, like it may be at whatever time their bedtime is. And you're like, the house is quiet. I'm relieved. And that's a type of happiness that gets into happiness is bigger than you think sometimes. And we have 31 different types of happiness that people experience. And some of them we don't always think of as happiness. But like I said, if you had a noisy, packed day and you finally get to tuck into bed and you're either watching TV or listening to something, listening to your favorite podcast, reading a book, doing whatever it is that just kind of helps you recenter and reconnect, that can be like relief, or maybe you're feeling content. And those are, again, maybe not as high vibing types of happiness as when you're just laughing or having fun or one of those kinds of happiness, but they're also happiness because they're something that makes you feel good.
Absolutely. So your book, you have a book out and it's called Practical Happiness, the 4 Principles to Improve Your Life. Tell us a little bit about those 4 principles.
Well, we discussed the second one, which is happiness zappers are manageable.
Okay.
And I briefly introduced you to the fourth one. So we'll do the first one and the third one because we haven't discussed those. So the first one is happiness is personal. And on the surface, you go, duh, of course, I know that. But we live in this group think world, in part because of social media and a lot of different things. But we sort of live in a group think. So sometimes if somebody else, something is making them happy, we're thinking it should make us happy too. And that's just sort of not how it works. You and I can go ride the same roller coaster. Maybe we both love roller coasters and we ride the same roller coaster and we have the exact same experience because we're sitting side by side. We still walk away from that experience, even if we both found it happy, having a different experience.
Yep.
So how it made us happy is still going to be different, even if you're in the same experience. A lot of times we kind of play competitive happiness and we look around and we say, well, if I only had that car, that house, or I got to go to Europe on my vacation or whatever it is somebody else is doing, we think that exact experience would make us the exact kind of happy. And it could maybe make us happy, but maybe we might be more happy with it. We might be less happy with it. We just don't necessarily know unless you have that experience. So happiness is, again, very personal. And with that comes, we have to also be respectful that just because we like something, maybe our significant other doesn't. Maybe we want to go see the Nutcracker every Christmas because that's our favorite ballet. And maybe our significant other rolls their eyes and is like, I don't want to go to the ballet. Now, that doesn't mean we never go do something with somebody that's important to us and do their important thing. But we also shouldn't necessarily, if we know our significant other doesn't like the ballet or doesn't like whatever kind of band or doesn't like something, we shouldn't necessarily expect them walking away with the giddy feeling we did, the happiness high that we did from that experience. And so I think that's another place that we get challenged. And in part it's because we want to share. We're like, this makes me so happy. It should make you happy too. The second one, as we mentioned, is happiness zappers are manageable. And in the book, we talk about how to create a zap map, which includes things like identifying, is that happiness zapper controllable, uncontrollable, or a bit of both? And so an example would be running late. Let's say you leave late and you get stuck in traffic and you're super annoyed. Is that controllable? Well, you leaving late, that part is controllable. But if there's a wreck on the highway, that's not anything you could do anything about. So, it kind of falls in the category of a bit of both. And then there's some, ways you decide how to manage those things. So then the third principle is happiness changes as you change. And I think while we, again, on the surface, we know that, we don't always apply that. So sometimes we're trying to make our present happiness based on our past happiness. And we think, but when I was 25, I loved going out and staying out till 3 or 4 in the morning. And I only needed 4 hours of sleep to survive and whatever. I was still as good as gold, or I could eat 5 pies and I never gained a pound or whatever it is that we look at various points in our life. and that may or may not make us happy at 45 or at even 30, because our life changes. When you bring home a new baby, your happiness changes when you probably string together 120 minutes of sleep in a row for the first 6 weeks.
Right.
You're like, yay, I got some sleep. I got actually some sleep. So
right.
And again, stay that way, but in those initial days, that's those initial usually 4 to 6 weeks, that can define your happiness, because it's going to change as our circumstances change. Now, we've just gone through globally an experience together of the pandemic, and we still aren't on the other side far enough to know exactly culturally how it's going to change us. Like after 9/11, we all changed. Like you would have never prior to that thought about, oh, I've got to take my shoes off or my belt or
right.
empty my pockets. You wouldn't have thought about doing that at the airport. And now somebody, even if you're a TSA pre-check, if somebody pulled you aside and said, I still need to dig through your bag, we think nothing of that in anymore. Or like, oh, we're taking our shoes off today. And you're like, I'm TSA pre-check, I shouldn't have to, but today we are. So that's what we do. Like I said, we're not far enough on the other side of the pandemic. I make a joke that what I learned is apparently when we speak to anyone or they're speaking to us, we're projectile spitting. And therefore, apparently we're French kissing everybody. And I have now learned that there are some people I don't want to French kiss. So I will probably always have a mask in my purse in the event I'm crossing paths with that. So I will stick that on.
Right.
Like I said, I still think about that every time I'm talking, because I'm like, I'll even put my hand over my mouth. I'm like, I'm not feeling spit, but I know I've seen those whatever green light studies. Mm-hmm. I know that that's happening. So I think, again, we're having some changes. People are reevaluating. I mean, I've seen numerous articles. They're reevaluating friendships. One of my members actually wrote in early on. She's like, I didn't realize how much stuff I was doing that didn't make me happy. She's like, my husband and I actually enjoy spending time together. We were so busy before. Exactly. She's like, we were so busy before that, we really did end up missing spending time together, but we've enjoyed being in this more lockdown. This was early on in this, in this particular state. So again, I think we don't know what that's, going to look like. We may always love having our groceries delivered. I remember my grandparents used to get their groceries delivered. And then they kind of quit, that quit happening at grocery stores. And then, now it's back. So we may always say, why would I go to the grocery store? Or we may always say, hey, I like takeout as much as I do going to an actual restaurant. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that works. We do know in the workplace, people want a hybrid work environment. So people it's not that they want to be home all the time. They want to be home when they need to be home, or they want to be home, but they also want to be able to go in and connect with their work tribe. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with office space. Yep. How that changes. It's probably going to change into more of a kind of a, you sign up for a cube on the day you think you want to be there, versus you having your own cube space or your own specific office. So, but we don't know that yet, but those are things that we're still figuring out. So, events, even unplanned events, can change us. And then we have the normal aging. We have, if somebody gets sick, you can have a disease that comes into your life that changes you and changes how you interact. If you were, a professional sports player and you get hurt and you're like, wait, I'm still 20 something, but I'm not going to be able to play pro, whatever, you're all of a sudden then going to have to change careers. It's not that you don't know that those things can happen, but they'll change your path. So, that's something we always have to, like, if we're in this place that we're feeling a little, we know we could feel happier. I think that's the best way to say it. Most likely you have not embraced something that's changed, or you may not have even identified it. So you're still trying to do something that you thought would make you happy because it did in the past, but you're now needing to find the new for where you are as a person. And then, so that's the happiness changes as you change principle. And then and in the book, what makes the book unique is that it's filled with stories from over 50 people that I interviewed. Actually, I interviewed over 60 people. So their stories are putting these principles into action. And I think it makes it easier for people to apply those principles through this really great array of stories. And the final principle is happiness is bigger than you think. And that's where we get into the 31 types of happiness. And for your audience, if they go to sohp.com/gift, so GIFT, they can get the happiness counter, which will give them all 31 types of happiness. And I encourage them to just take 15 minutes, the previous 15 minutes or previous hour, and go and count all the happy moments they experienced on that, from that list of the 31 types of happiness. I've done this for over 20 years. I think for the most part, people have always found more than they thought. I think one time I had one person one time who had no happy moments in the previous couple of hours prior to that. And well, that also falls into, we just don't know what somebody's dealing with. And I was actually at a conference with counselors, and they started shaming this poor gentleman. And I'm like, there's no happy shaming, because again, we don't know. He could be dealing with a sick spouse. He could be dealing with a health issue of his own. He could be having a migraine headache. And
you know, when you're, don't know.
Yeah, when you're in that space, you're like, nothing's happy. The only thing happy is a dark room and my eyes closed. And hopefully, you don't know. And but in general, I've done this with lots of people, thousands of people over the years. Most people will discover that they probably experience some kind of happiness that they may not have thought about. And so it ranges, from the obvious ones. Like I said, we've mentioned them, humor, fun, enthusiasm, things we get excited about. But it's also things of like when we get inspired, when we're like, oh, I've been trying to figure out XYZ problem, and now I know what the answer is. And you're inspired to go solve it, whether it's a work problem or you're trying to reorganize something in your house. And you're like, oh yeah, I now know how that will all fit on that shelf. and you go do it. It's exciting. It's fun. You're getting to do that. But it's relief. It's feeling blessed. It's obviously it's gratitude. It's satisfaction. Sometimes there's nothing that's happier than when you're satisfied that you did something well, or you tried a new recipe and it turned out better than you expected. There's a lot of types of happiness that happen that we just sort of glaze over. And when you start adding up all those types of happiness, it does sort of reduce how big your happiness zappers are. When you're like, oh wait, ping, happy moment, ping, happy moment, ping, happy moment.
Right. I love it. Thank you so much, Pamela. This has been amazing. It's got me thinking about all the things that, like you said, I kind of glaze over those little happy moments. It's like, okay, that was quick, and on to the next thing. So I need to take more time and appreciate those.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
The youngest is 17. The oldest is 30.
Okay. So you've got older kids. Well, it's a fun thing to bring out with your kids at, if you have a family meal or something, if you print out the happiness counter, and then at dinner one night, have them fill it out for, the last few hours. It will actually change your dinner conversation.
I'll have to, look into doing that. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again so much. And, and listeners, I'm going to have all of Pamela's information, the link to her book, the link to the happiness counter, everything will be in the show notes. If you go to the realityofitall.com and pull up Pamela's episode, everything will be right there, nice and neat for you. So this has been a really fun conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. We'll talk to you in the next show. That's it for today's show. Thanks for listening. Be sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, and TikTok.